To talk about some advanced techniques with how we can blend our plates together for this QC process. So this is just some extra things you can do if you're having trouble with some bright edges or some dark edges, or blending those type of problem areas. And so we're going to go over a more advanced node called Add Mix. And this is a pretty confusing node if you're sort of starting out, and in general, it's sort of a confusing concept. But basically, to explain this, I'm going to need to explain a little bit of the math behind what's happening when you're merging a picture over another picture. So you're doing A over B. And what exactly is happening when you're doing an A over B? You can actually go here and hover your mouse over some of these operations to see some of the, if you hover over the operation thing, you can actually see the math behind essentially each operation. But it's easier, at least for me, to understand things visually and also to explain them visually. So actually what's happening when you're merging a picture A over B, essentially what you're doing is you're taking the original picture and you're stenciling it from the background. So you're doing a stencil. So essentially it's taking the alpha, it's only looking at that picture, and it's cutting it away from the background. So that's the first thing that happens in an over. And then what it does is it mathematically takes the red, green, and blue pixels, and it pluses them over the background. So it's a plus. If we switch this to plus, and if we look at the difference, oh, sorry, not a screen, that's supposed to be plus. So this is what's actually happening in an over. It's taking the alpha, cutting it out from the background. You could switch it to a multiply as well. It's probably, it's like the inverse of a multiply. So essentially it's a stencil, but I don't want to get too complicated. Essentially it's basically just making those pixels zero. So actually, if you want to be really technical about it, I'll just explain it real quick, but I don't want to confuse people. Essentially what it's doing is taking the alpha, inverting it. So it's taking this alpha, it's inverting it. So this is the alpha, and then it's multiplying that against the original image. But it's kind of the same thing as a stencil. So yeah, I don't want to overly complicate it, but this is how you can think of it. It's cutting it out, and then it's adding, and then it's using the color pixels and plussing them on. So, if you just imagine, whatever this color is, imagine if this pixel is like, 0.8, 0.7, 0.09. If you add that to 0, it's just going to be the same picture because you're adding it to nothing. So if you compare the two, over and plus, you see there's absolutely no difference between these two results. So what the Add Mix does is it sort of does a little trick to kind of control the brightness and darkness of edges. So what it does is essentially what you're doing is you're placing a grade node here, and you're placing a grade node here. All right, and it's only affecting the alpha of these two pictures. So this is a little bit more of an advanced technique, but it's pretty useful to understand if you get into a pinch. So imagine, so now we have a little grade to control the alpha here and a grade to control the plus here. So what does that do? Well, if you control the alpha here and you adjust the white point or black point, or you adjust the gamma, you can essentially make the edges darker or brighter by gammaing up and down. So if we make the white point a little bit darker, we see we kind of fill in that area with black. And now if we just plus the image over, we see that actually what it's doing is kind of darkening what's behind that area a little bit. So that's pretty useful for if you have areas that you just want to make a little bit darker, or maybe you want to make it a little bit brighter. You can sort of do the opposite effect with the black point. So again, you can also control on the kind of foreground layer. So here's your plus picture, sort of. If you adjust the alpha of this, when you plus it over, if you're adjusting that alpha, you can sort of make the edges brighter or darker. So if you're adjusting the black point and white point, that's what you get. Usually you're adjusting the gamma though. So the gamma, and then you can adjust the gamma of the one behind it. And you see, for example, if I disable these and enable them, sometimes we can thicken up areas that aren't behaving well. But you see, it doesn't do a good job all the way in all places. So sometimes this is something you want to mix on and off in different places. But you can see how we can actually restore some detail at different places of the image if we adjust it. Now this setup I just did, you don't necessarily have to remember this, but this is the principle of how it's working. So essentially the add mix is doing the same exact thing. So if I plug this in and I plug this B input in, and the first thing you want to do is make sure this is set to pre-multiplied, because this image is already pre-multiplied. This is essentially doing the same thing. So you have the A and the B. So you can think of these as two color corrections, except we're using a curve instead of the color correction node. So imagine that this is the B side and that this is the A side. So it's doing the same exact thing. We have the gamma, which is in the middle. If you put a point here, you can control alt click, put a point. So then you're just adjusting the gamma. So this is the A side. So on the A side, we're adjusting the gamma on the A side. Or you're adjusting the white point of the A side. So that's essentially what it is. And the way you use it is kind of sort of how I showed, but we'll just do it through this actual node. So for example, if I want to like thicken up that a little bit, maybe you could go to the B side and play with the gamma. So maybe I'll put a point here and just push it up and down and just see, maybe it looks a little bit better if we just thicken that up a little bit. This is something we might only want to mix into certain places. So if it works in one area but not in another, it's no problem, because you can just play around with it. So for example, here, it looks like we maintain a little bit more of what appears to be motion blur by just playing up and down with this slider just on the B side. Now the A side, you can do the same thing. You basically just play up and down with the gamma and see, maybe we're trying to darken some edges and whatever. And, for example, here, if I compare this to the over, you see it looks like we're maintaining more motion blur, particularly over some of these areas where it's brighter. And here it looks like, it kind of gives the perception that this is a little bit thicker as well. So it's sort of a trick in what it's doing, but we didn't even adjust our alpha at all, and we're sort of getting the perception that we've maintained a little bit more detail. So the way I like to work with this is I'll do maybe a little add mix. So let me just delete all this stuff, because this is the A and the B. A and the B. So that's how it kind of works, but you can do it all through this node. And so what I'll do is I'll do a normal merge over, but I'll do sometimes I'll do an add mix with the foreground and the background plugged into its own node. And if it works in certain areas, I'll key mix this result over this stream. So for example, we have our normal merge that we've done, and then we have the add mix. This is not plugged into the merge. This is plugged into the background. So background and foreground, just like this one, foreground, background. So I like some of the areas that it's giving us around some of those edges maybe. So what I'm going to do is put a key mix, and we'll put it here, and then I'll put a roto node. And then I'm going to rotoscope around the areas that I like, that it maintains detail. Maybe some areas are a little bit too thick or whatever, so I'll feather it off and just kind of mix it around wherever I need it. And so, here it looks pretty good. So you see now it's only putting it on the areas that we need, and that's pretty cool. So you can just go through and roto that. It might be faster if I pre-comp this, because the script is pretty heavy with all of this calculation going on. So I might, at this point in the composite, it might be smart to pre-comp the background and pre-comp the foreground before I go through and rotoscope stuff, because every time I change frames now, if you watch, it's going to take a while. So, I mean, it's not too bad, but yeah. So yeah, even here, it's doing a good job though. Our add mix, which we've key mixed onto the background. We're basically just mixing two images, this image and this image. We're mixing those two together through here. And so I'll just move this over. Let's see if it does a better job. So we can disable and enable. I think it's generally better overall. It's kind of giving us a little bit of, I don't know if it's better there. It kind of feels like that doesn't match the motion blur entirely, so maybe I'll just not use it there. And And this is really just eyeballing it. Does it look better? That's the question. You got to be careful. You see some areas here, it's not doing a good job, and that's not what we want. So I'm not going to put it there. I don't want to create dark edges, but it's a good way of removing light edges or dark edges. So if you have a little of an edge that's too light or dark, it's a really good way of going in there and kind of attacking that specific area. And you really just want to play up and down with those two sliders on the gamma to either increase the brightness or decrease. So I'm kind of gaining up while I'm doing this because it's a little bit easier to see what it's actually doing. So you see it's kind of bringing a slight amount of detail back. So I'll go through and kind of do that. And so that's one way of kind of restoring detail in different places with brighter, darker edge. Let me just see here. So it really works pretty well over this motion blur area in particular, it looks like. So that's pretty cool because we want to feel like we're still having that motion blur. So here you see it doesn't work maybe as well when I put it here. Actually, it's starting to get rid of a little bit of a bright edge that seems to be kind of a halo there. So actually, in this case, on these frames at least, where it's motion blurred, we can use it. So that's that technique. It's not a lot of people are actually using this node all the time, but it's a really useful node if you're just trying to get small details back. Again, you got to be careful. So here we're getting a little bit of a dark edge now on these last frames. So here I would just kind of move it up and turn it off. I don't want to have it there. So I'll just go through and double check that we didn't create any unintentional dark edge. So there's still a hole and different QC things that we would need to fix, like on that frame, like I already mentioned, but we're still going through and just trying to teach this particular concept. So that's how that works. You see it, just a tiny bit of detail added back. Another technique we can do, another advanced technique. Let's just go back a couple frames. I'm just going to go to a frame where this is going to be a good example. Okay, so if I go back to the normal exposure, something I mentioned was that sometimes over bright backgrounds, we get this like sort of eroding on these semi-transparent edges. And that's just because the light is kind of passing through that edge and it's just making it less visible because it's semi-transparent. So you get this sort of harsh looking edge, even though our edges are soft everywhere else. And like I said, this does actually happen with cameras where there's something very bright. It kind of will make this kind of, you see the soft and then you get this really hard edge. And this is not our alpha, because if we look at the alpha, if we look at the alpha normal exposure, we actually have a soft edge. But when we merge it over, it looks hard. So sometimes you might think that you're getting a hard edge, but there's two things you can do. You could either go here with a grade and kind of put a little roto behind this edge and just darken it down and make that less bright, and then you see some of the softness comes back. So you're kind of cheating because you're putting a color correction behind to reduce the brightness. So that's one quick way to do it, but that would be a little bit time consuming to do it that way. So another way to do it is to unpremultiply your footage. So this is another mix technique. So you see I've mixed this over the main stream. So I'm going to do another mix technique where I kind of mix something else. So I'm going to unpremultiply. I need to do this before the defocus. This particular technique has to be done before the defocus. So if we do a log to lin, and then we pre-multiply this, and then we put the defocus there. So I need to make a copy of the defocus. And in the log to lin node, you want to set the setting to lin to log. So we didn't talk a lot about color space in this class, but essentially a really short version of it, and I would recommend you go on YouTube and find a tutorial about linear color space in Nuke, just to understand a little bit about color space. I haven't made a class quite yet about color space. This is like a super in-depth topic, and I want to make sure to get it right in terms of the way I teach it. But you can find a lot of videos on YouTube actually about this. But essentially, we're working in a linear space normally, which is a way of processing the colors that we're working with. And sometimes what you can do is work in logarithmic space. So this is like if you do this node and you set it to what I set, all the colors will become really flat and gray. And what it's doing is kind of affecting the way the highlights are rolling off. So if you look at the values of the highlights, it's really changing all the values of a picture to a really flat picture. So that's just the simple way you can think of it. You don't need to necessarily understand all the math behind this thing to understand how to use it. So basically you just need to do this, put it in log space. You do the defocus thing that we were doing. And then you want to plug the background and do the same thing. So you want to put that into log space, and you want to merge this over the other one in log space. So it's like this. And then at the end, now you want to just convert it back into that color space that we had before. So basically you select this and you say log to lin. So now the colors will go back to normal. So we've just done the merge operation within a flat color space. And by doing that, like I said, you don't even have to really understand all the math going on. It's just think of it like the colors are more flat, and when you merge it into space and you convert it back, sometimes you'll get better highlights roll off. So if I compare the two, here's the normal linear merge and here's the log merge. So the log merge, or merging in log space rather, will actually maintain details in highlight areas. So you got to be careful, because this technique, it works better over highlights, but it doesn't work better sometimes over dark areas. So sometimes in dark areas, you actually lose detail. So in this case, we've actually lost a little bit of detail over darker areas. But you see, if we look at bright areas, let's go to a bright area. So in bright areas, like for example here, we're actually getting more detail. So basically what you would want to do if you want to maintain like the maximum amount of details you can is you only want to do this type of this whole thing only over where there are highlights on the background. So the way you could do this is, and this is why this is an advanced technique, is because, yeah, it's a little bit more than just merging a picture. You don't necessarily have to do this, but this is really, really a good technique if you have like hair over a bright background, because that's hard to, you're going to automatically get the effect I was telling you about, where it's kind of eroding, and you're going to wonder, well, my alpha looks good, why is it doing this erode? And it's best to do your merge in a log space if it's over a very bright background. Or you could do a little bit of the admix. You could do a combination of these two like we're doing. So I'm going to take this result and I'm going to key mix it wherever there are highlights. So I'm going to put it here. And then what I'm going to do, so you see all of these are all plugging into the background. They're not plugging into the merge. So what we could do is like basically put a dot node here and plug it into the mask. And so what is that doing? It's just taking the background, so that it's not doing anything yet. We need to set the mask to be the highlight areas so that this will only happen wherever there are really bright things on the background. So if I key the highlights and I kind of shrink the area by controlling the A input, we can isolate the highlight areas like this, and we can maybe just blur it out a little bit like so. So we kind of just capture all the highlight areas. So basically this effect where we're doing this special merge, the merge in log space, will only happen where we're putting the alpha. So let me just make sure the alpha is white as well. So if we sample it, we see it's 0.99. I think it'll be fine. So let's just try it. So if I disable and enable, you see the merge is only happening now on the areas with very, very bright highlights. So it's happening here, but we're not losing the detail. For example, in the dark area, nothing is happening there, but it is happening wherever there's highlights. So we can expand that area as well if we want to just capture a little bit more highlights maybe. And then, something like this. So you see, we just brought back some edges and we get less of that eroding type of look. So yeah, that's basically how you can do it. You can mix techniques, you can blend them together wherever they work or don't work. But if we look at our original merge, and now we look after the add mix we did and after the log mix, I don't know, it's not a mix, but it's a log merge. If we look after those two, just before and after, let's just compare. before, after. So it's looking better. We did add a little bit of a dark edge there, so that's probably coming from our ad mix. So we'll just kind of make sure that that's not happening in that spot with the roto shape that we did there. So, you know, you got to be careful with the ad mix because we can actually mess up our image unintentionally. So yeah, that's pretty much it for two more advanced techniques, the ad mix and the log merge, and that will help you in your QC process. There's still some areas that are a little bit semi-transparent here. So those, if they're not getting fixed by this technique, we're going to need to go back and sort of fix these within the alpha. So you see that it's actually coming through our kind of dynamic despill. We're actually plussing, you know, the background, and it's sort of losing a lot of our edge there. So we got to be a little bit careful with that. And that's because I think our alpha is just not completely accurate here. So we would need to go in there and improve this alpha a bit. So you see the areas that are a little bit semi-transparent. That's where we're starting to have problems in our final QC process. So I'll go through at the end and just tweak that a little bit. But that's good for this video. I don't want to make it too long. I'll just make sure that there's no weird edges coming from that thing. And so there's still some little sharp edges and stuff that we got. And in general, I think it's working pretty well. Let me just, I'm just double checking the ad mix because it looks like it's adding some dark edges that we don't want in some areas. So sometimes you can just kind of blend it, and you just want to go through and like just double check all that stuff. And yeah, so most of the semi-transparent areas we're having remaining are just because we need to improve our alpha. That's also why I don't waste my time necessarily perfecting my alpha at the start, because, you know, maybe your alpha is not completely perfect in an area like this, but you can't even see it in the end comp. So why waste your time if it's not visible in the final image? So if I see problem areas, that's where I'll go fix the alpha. So that's pretty much it. I'll start on the next video, which is QC part 2. And yep.